Hey everyone, we're going to be looking at our next type of genetic problem. They're called sex-linked genes. So let's get into it. Let's start off with some fruit fly genetics. In fruit flies, red eye color is dominant over white eye color. As we can see in the pictures below, a red-eyed fruit fly, those are dominant eyes, and white-eyed fruit fly, recessive eyes. Predict the genotypes and phenotypes if you cross a homozygous red-eyed female fly with a white-eyed male, and show that in a Punnett square. All right, over to the Jamboard. And if we were doing this problem normally, I would use a capital R for red, and I would use a smaller case r for white. Red eyes dominant over white. All right, it said we were mating homozygous red-eyed females, so I would use capital R, with white-eyed males. The only way to have white eyes, if we're following the old rules, is having two little r's. And then filling in the boxes, I would expect 100% of the offspring to have the genotype big R, little r, and therefore 100% of the offspring to have red eyes. All right, that wasn't too hard, was it? And when they did this experiment, that's actually exactly what happened. All right, now back here, there's a nice close-up of fruit fly red eyes. All 139 of the first generation flies had red eyes. All right, now we're going to do something called the reciprocal cross. This is where we switch the genders and what color eyes that they have. So we're going to mate red-eyed males this time with white-eyed females. Well, what would you expect? Well, going back to the Jamboard, would that really change our Punnett square? It's just that the males would be big R, and the females this time would be little r, and you would still expect all 100% offspring to have red eyes and have the same genotype of being heterozygous big R, little r. Well, they did that experiment, and it's not what they got. So the scientist's name was Thomas Hunt Morgan. Here's his results. He actually got half of the flies having red eyes and half of them having white eyes. So 50-50. And not only that, they noticed that all of the red-eyed flies were females and all of the white-eyed flies were males. So they set out to wonder why this was. Totally unexpected results. Well, they did figure it out. So we have to remember that genes are on chromosomes. Here's a picture of a chromosome. And we may have, I hope you have studied this already. These are a picture of your chromosomes. So these are homologous pairs of chromosomes. Remember, each one of these, you get one from mom and one from dad. So chromosome number one of these came from mom, one came from dad. They have the same genes on them, but they might be different alleles, different versions of the gene. For instance, again, like eye color, maybe one of them has red, one of them has white. So if you get a red from mom and a white from dad, then you would be heterozygous for that gene. Or go back to blood type. Maybe one parent gave you A blood type, and it's on chromosome 1. I'm not sure. I don't think it really is on chromosome 1, but we'll just say it is. But let's say mom gave you A, dad gave you B, and then you have blood type AB because of that gene combination. So in the karyotype here, we line up all of our chromosomes from the first pair all the way down to the 22nd pair, the 21st pair are the smallest. 22 are pretty small as well. And then we find the 23rd pair. They set those off to the side separately because those are the sex chromosomes. On the X chromosomes, there's many other genes, hundreds of other genes, but there's also gender-causing genes on there. So that's why it's called the sex chromosomes. So if you're a female, you get an X chromosome from mom and an X chromosome from dad. That is a homologous pair of chromosomes that have the same genes on them, though possibly different alleles. But if you're male, the story's a little bit different. Everything homologous pairs up until you get to the sex chromosomes, the 23rd pair. If you are a genetic male, then you have an X from mom, and then dad gave you a Y. These two chromosomes are not homologous. They do not have the same genes on them at all, though they do both have gender-causing genes. All right, so the Y chromosome only has about 27 or so genes, and a lot of them are for causing maleness. So what they figured out is that the gene for eye color in fruit flies is actually found on the X chromosome. So if you're a female, you get 2 copies for your eye color gene. So that might mean you could be homozygous red and get a red from both mom and dad. Or you could be homozygous white and get a white from both mom and dad. Or you could be one of each, heterozygous, and get a red and a white, one from each parent. However, if you're male, because this gene for eye color is only on the X, you only get 1 copy. So whatever is on your X chromosome, you get that from your mother, and that's what you get. That is the phenotype that you will display. So now knowing this, let's do these problems the correct way, using the new rules for sex-linked traits. All right, so here's what we will be doing. We will use the X chromosomes to distinguish mom, 2 X's, and then we'll use the X and the Y to distinguish dad. Then we're going to use superscripts to distinguish the gene for eye color, or whatever gene we might display that is on the X chromosome. There's more than just fruit fly eye color. So that becomes a superscript. So if I'm reading this Punnett square here, the females are homozygous for their red eye color, big R, big R. And the males are, well, they only get the 1 gene. They have white eyes. Notice the gene is only on the X chromosome, never on the Y, because these are different chromosomes. They do not have the same genes on them. The Y just kind of goes along for the ride to let us know that, yeah, this is going to be male. So as for the offspring, we use our same rules in making a Punnett square, and we bring our letters down and over. Always write the dominant one first, and in doing sex-linked traits, you will use X's and Y's, and use the superscripts for the other genes. All right, so in this case, this would be the correct way to do that original problem where we took homozygous red-eyed females with white-eyed males. Then what we would expect, like we got before, all 100% of the offspring are red eyes, because in every square we have the dominant gene, the big R, present. Well, let's do the problem the other way and see if it works out. Remember, in the other problem, we did the reciprocal cross, and we made the males red-eyed and the females were white-eyed. So let's go to the Jamboard. All right, I've made my Punnett squares, and I've already got my X's and Y's written in just to make it easier. All right, so we used red-eyed males. The only way to have a red-eyed male is to have a capital R here for red eyes. The Y gets nothing. The females were all white-eyed, and they get 2 genes. Each X has the eye color gene, and since they were white-eyed, the only way to be white-eyed is to have 2 recessives. So now let's fill in. We've got a big R and a little r. All right, then for this box, we can only bring the little r down, and the y gets nothing. Over here, bring the big R over. Oops, I've got to put an X here. And then bring the little r down. And then over here, y gets nothing, bring the little r down. So does this fit our results? And yes, it does, because remember their results were 50% had red eyes and 50% had white eyes. And then the curious thing, all the females were red-eyed, which fits. We have big R, little r for all the XXs or females. And then all 100% of the males were white-eyed. So that makes sense as well. They all have the little r. So that's how we make our data fit. And back to here so you can check my work. Yep, one half red eyes, one half white. All the red eyes were females, all the white eyes were males. And if we use the sex-linked problems rules, then it actually works out. Well, it's all fine and good with fruit flies and the color of their eyes, but how about some human traits that are on the X chromosome? That might be a little more interesting to us. Well, red-green color blindness is an example of a gene that's on the X chromosome. So in this case, kind of like the red and white eyes, I could use whatever letters I want as long as I use the capital one that's correct. How about we use big R again? That'll make it easy. I'm going to use a big R for normal. So someone who has a big R can actually make the proteins in their eyes to see red and green. But if you're a little r, that's recessive, you are red-green colorblind. Again, sorry, it's hard to write with a mouse. All right, so red-green colorblind is little r. So let's say that we have a female who can actually see red and green. So that's the case I would know. She would have definitely at least one big R. And then we have a male who can also see normal red and green. So I would know he has a big R here as well. But let's say that they have a son who is red-green colorblind. What must be the other letter that the female has, the mother? In order to have a male son who is red-green colorblind, she has to be a carrier or heterozygous of that recessive trait. All right, so we can bring that down here. So this is kind of cool to see that anything on the X chromosome for a male, he gets that from his mom. So if she's got a defective gene, in this case this is a defective gene where you're unable to make the proteins to see red and green, you get that from your mother. All right, what about the daughters here? Well, this one would be homozygous normal, big R, big R. This one would be, just like mom, a carrier. Therefore, in the future, could have the potential to have a son who's red-green colorblind. And then this son, if he gets that one, is totally fine. So this is why we see more males having red-green color blindness than we see females. Let's go to, let's try another one. So how could you get a female who's red-green colorblind? What would you have to do? Oops. Yes, sex-linked problems take a little bit more time if you have to put in all the X's and Y's. So what would you have to do to get a female who's red-green colorblind? Well, mom can still be normal, but would need to be a carrier or heterozygous with the little R for red-green color blindness, Dad would have to be colorblind, red-green colorblind, in order to pass that on to this daughter right here, 2 little R's. This daughter is a carrier, just like Mom. Son here is normal. Oh, and then that son is red-green colorblind. So it's a 50-50 chance to have a child in this family, whether it be boy or girl, that would be red-green colorblind. So see how it's much more common to have this in males than it is in females. In order to get it as a female, you have to get it from both Mom and Dad and be unlucky enough to get that recessive allele. Another example of a sex-linked trait on the X chromosome is this gene for blood clotting. It's called hemophilia. There's actually a few different kinds, but we'll just say in general hemophilia, the one that's on the X chromosome. So having a big H, the dominant allele, is normal blood clotting, that you can actually make the proteins to clot your blood normally. But the recessive version of that gene is hemophilia. You have trouble clotting your blood. It's actually quite dangerous. People who even get a paper cut could literally bleed to death because they can't clot their blood. Or let's say you fall down. Normally, most of us would just get a bruise, and then the clotting would happen underneath the skin and we'd be just fine. But somebody who has hemophilia could, again, literally bleed to death. Back in the day, in ancient times, people would die of this quite readily. But today, you can get a shot of the proteins, the clotting factors, if you need to, and be just fine. You might recognize a famous family in history where this was the case. Do you recognize the last Tsar of Russia here from your history classes? This is Nicholas, the last Tsar of Russia, right before World War I, the early 1900s. He married this woman, Alexandra, who was from English royalty. She was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria, and they had 5 kids. They had 4 daughters. They had 4 daughters first. The world was a little bit worried, I guess, or at least Russians were a bit worried that he would not have a male heir. But then he did end up having a male heir. It was the 5th child born, little Alexei here, by his sister Anastasia. Unfortunately, he had hemophilia, and he was a sickly little kid. Here's some pictures with problems with hemophilia. And they tried to hide it from the world because they wanted to make Russia think they were strong and could provide an heir who would be healthy and take over the throne after Nicholas was gone. So it caused this whole thing, and they hired this guy, Rasputin, the evil monk. At least that's the reputation that he has. He seemed to be the only one who could help the boy. People thought it was magic at the time, but really it was probably just hypnotism. He would hypnotize the kid. That slows your heart rate down, makes you feel better, gives your blood time to clot. But people thought he was having this influence on the royal family, so it caused this whole big thing that's kind of started the downfall of the family. And they ended up bringing the whole family under house arrest for a while, and then they murdered the whole family. A very sad story. Go back to your history books and check that one out. We get a little biology mixing with history there. So here's what their Punnett square looked like. So Nicholas, the Tsar, was just fine. He did not have hemophilia, so he would get a big H right there. Again, nothing on the Y. Now Alexandra was also normal and did not have hemophilia, so she would have a big H, but yet they had a son who had it. So we know that in order to have a son who has it, she would have to carry the little H, the recessive H, and pass it on to her son, Alexei. As for the daughters, well, they could have been either homozygous dominant, normal, or heterozygous carriers. We would never get to know because they were murdered before they reached marriage and childbearing. It was a 50-50 chance if they had a son that he was going to be normal for blood clotting or have hemophilia, but it's random chance, and he got the bad luck having the little h for hemophilia. All right, before I go, let's take a look at this. You may have seen these before, but let's do a little test. Go back to the red-green color blindness trait, and let's see if you are red-green colorblind. So I'm going to show you some slides. Everybody should be able to see the first two. You should be able to make a number out of this slide. You should see a 25 right there. So everybody should see that. And everybody should be able to see this one, theoretically. You saw 56. Then you were right. Now, the next few, if you are red-green colorblind, you will probably have trouble with all or some of the next four. So can you see the number? There's an 8 in there. How about this one? Ooh, that one's a little difficult, right? I hope you see a 6, right? Otherwise, maybe I'm red-green colorblind. How about this one? 29. And finally, 45. See that one there? I got to go back to this one. This was a tough one, but yeah, 6 is in there. I'm pretty sure. All right, and finally for my grand finale, just like the X has genes on it, well, the Y chromosome for you guys out there, for those of you carrying the Y chromosome, the Y has about 27 genes, as I mentioned, and a lot of them have to do with gender. Like one gene is called the SRY gene that causes testosterone during development so that the testes can form instead of ovaries. But there's this wonderfully interesting gene that's on the Y chromosome. I wonder if any of you guys have it. And I'm totally being truthful here. There you go. There is a very distinguishing gene on the Y chromosome. Thank goodness it's on the Y. I don't have to worry about it. But it's for hairy ear rims. So this isn't just hair coming out of the inner ear. This is the whole rim having long curly hair. So I hope you enjoy that, and I hope you can wonder, do you have that gene or not, or is it in your family? All right. Hope you enjoyed learning about sex-linked traits, the X and Y genes, or X and Y chromosomes. Let me know if you have any questions.